Hey everyone, Pastor Mark Stevenson with Harmony-Toluca Lake, an affirming faith community and second campus of Hollywood United Methodist Church. And it is a great pleasure to be part of the Harmony Podcast Network for a short stories special episode. And I am so excited about this because I have the opportunity to interview one dear friend of mine who is also a colleague in ministry, Rev Sandy Olewine. Sandy, she has a perspective that many of us don't. She lived in the Middle East from 1995 to 2006, and so and in various capacities. But she also has this great breadth of knowledge and has received numerous recognitions for her peace with justice work in Palestine, Israel, and has written many published articles. Also, she serves as currently the South District Superintendent for the California Pacific Annual Conference. So again, it is a joy and a pleasure. Sandy, hello.
Hi, Mark. How are you? It's so good to be with you today.
It is. I'm so stoked to have the coup of Sandy Olewine with me today. So, let's dive into a very simple topic and talk about the Middle East.
Yeah, why not? Have a cup of coffee, add some chocolate. Let's go.
Right. It's one thing. I was pondering on this as I keep seeing the things about the Gaza war, but it's so much more than just the Gaza war, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a whole lot more than the Gaza war. The Gaza war is the current expression of the struggle that's gone on for about 100 years over this land that is mutually called Israel-Palestine. That stretches, from the Mediterranean sort of to the Jordan, up to the north towards the Syrian and Lebanese borders, and then down through the Negev in the south to the Aqaba Sea. And it's just the current expression of an ongoing conflict and struggle over land and identity.
Right. Well, so for you, and again, the number of years that you were there, you have this knowledge and experience. Why do you, what is this struggle, what makes it particularly important to you?
Well, as you mentioned, I lived there full time from the fall of 1995 through mid-February of 2006. Both as a scholar in residence initially at an ecumenical institute, and then as our United Methodist liaison to Jerusalem through our General Board of Global Ministries. But prior to that, I have been doing interfaith work the entire time I have been a United Methodist clergy person. First with Jewish Christian dialogue and leadership with young rabbis and young clergy, Christian clergy. As I was finishing that time, we were beginning to expand that to young Muslim leaders. And I served at Holman United Methodist Church under when James M. Lawson was the pastor there during the first Gulf War. It was during that time that Reverend Lawson, Rabbi Bierman, Dr. Hatut at the Islamic Center, and then Reverend George Regas up at All Saints in Pasadena, who was then rector, put together the Interfaith Coalition against the Gulf War. And so that really deepened my work on peace and justice issues in the region, but also how we did that kind of interfaith work together, and not only in just learning to understand each other better, but also that we could actually stand together on policy issues, to call communities to jointly to more than prayer together, but to also be in action and political action, and to try to make a difference in how our government responded to crises. The opportunity came for me then to travel to Israel-Palestine. It was not something I actually particularly had a call to initially. I went because clergy often get free trips to go to the Holy Land. So I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll go anywhere for free. But it was in that very trip, and actually the almost exactly 30 years ago today. It's like another week would have been exactly 30 years ago. And it was in that trip that I thought, wait a minute, as I'm watching and driving around the countryside, I was realizing that things I knew about the conflict were really sound bites. I didn't know very much about the depth of it. So I began to study. I went back the next year with 70 members from Holman. I stayed for an additional 10 days after they left to spend time with our missionaries who are in that position. And really began to listen to the stories of the peoples of the land. And so the opportunity came for me to return in that position. So I went back. I was first a scholar in residence at the Tantra Ecumenical Institute, and then full time with GBGM. And that particular position gave me the opportunity to hear from Palestinians and Israelis across the political, social spectrums, because my job was to get people off a tour bus and to have them meet people and to hear their stories and to do more than sound bites, and to not only treat that place when they came on a visit like it's a museum for their own sort of spiritual place, but actually this is a real place with real people with real current issues. And as Methodists, but also as primarily US citizens, we play a huge role in what happens in that place. And so it became very personal, became home for me for so long, because I have relationships with people across those spectrums in that land.
Mm. It's certainly a complicated situation going on over there, and often we just have no idea how to respond to it. So, because for some, they look at it and go, "Well, all these people have been fighting for centuries, and they're never solving it." So, I guess from the Christian perspective, maybe even just saying a Methodist perspective, how do we respond to that?
Yeah, that's a common, both to say that it's complicated, because we've described lots of things that are complicated because it means that we don't have to try to figure them out because so I would say it's complex rather than complicated, and it hasn't been going on for centuries. This is a particular time in history and period of conflict that exists, that is not just something that's gone on for generation after generation for decades and centuries back. I mean, yes, this region has been racked with conflict, but the conflict between Israel and Palestine is about 100 years old, and not forever, which means it's a modern conflict. With roots in a lot of different areas. It was born out of complications. Actually, it had nothing to do with that region. It's in of itself. It began post World War I when the Ottoman Empire was broken up, and you had the French and the British and dividing up countries. So it's sort of a part of the colonial reality at that period of time. And so you had that happening. You had sort of the late 1800s, you had the beginning of modern political Zionism that really came to fruition in Europe, of the ethnocentric nationalism that was growing in that period of time, and was continuing to deepen the anti-Semitism in those nations where people who were Jews were not allowed to be a part of any nation they lived in because they didn't fit the ethnic profile of whatever that particular country was. And it's part of what gave root and rise to the modern political Zionism that we had. And so you had that beginning movement in the late 1800s and early 20th century, early 1900s, of trying to get Jewish folks from around the world to settle in what was then considered Palestine. But a lot of people didn't go during that period of time. They were choosing when they were leaving out of Eastern Europe. A lot of the Jewish folks actually ended up coming to the United States in that period, or other Western European countries, and not actually a large immigration to Palestine. And then, of course, we had World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust. And following that, there was also rejection of taking Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors in nations. And so there was sort of a sense, okay, well, they got a country now, let's send them over here to Israel. We had a lot of forces outside the region, and a lot of powerful nation states that had a lot to do with shaping that context. And there was also, obviously, activity in the Arab world also around these things. Palestine was not a country per se at that point, right? Didn't have elected leaders in any shape or form. But so that we've had all of these sort of forces at play. But the West has been really dominant in shaping what's happened in that region. And so, and as people of the United States, we have to be recognize very much that our tax dollars have gone um, to both support what for Palestinians is occupation, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, and with our support of Israel as a government in relationship to our military aid. Um, and then we've provided relief, right, at the same time to Palestinians that's caused by the weapons that sometimes that we send to the Israelis. And so we are really highly mixed up into this conflict, and so we need to pay attention. So we do need to know, because we are actually funding much of what goes on. And so whether you agree with it or not, we at least need to be knowledgeable about it and not say it doesn't matter or just those people over there.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime war breaks out, we have any places, and we so often tend to, in many conflicts, say there's the good guys and the bad guys, right? And so often this gets set up with that, and then you add into it, in a conflict that's different than other conflicts, you add in both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia,
Mm-hmm.
and just Western racism to people of color. You add all of that structural stuff together on top of this conflict, and it does make it complex. There's not a simple thread you pick, and all of a sudden it's just going to, like, flowers are going to bloom everywhere, because there are a lot of layers that people, I think, need to understand, so that they can at least begin to have real dialogue about real solutions that are not simplistic, that don't erase people's history, the emotions that they bring to it, the commitments and the connections to the land that they have, especially for those of us who live outside of that.
Yeah, because there's some real high emotions going on right now. I mean, so you just take the situation of this war, and then suddenly we have seen Islamophobia coming up, and anti-Semitism and hate crimes, and it's just it's mind-boggling.
I mean, obviously, the attack on October 7th in southern Israel was horrendous, and in just about every way was a violation of sort of every convention, the Geneva Convention. Much of it would qualify as a war crime. The Israeli response now has plenty of other things to it now that also can be considered war crime. And certainly there are people that are sort of who work in the international law who are actually putting through some of this work now to look at those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 1,200 on the Israeli side has given way now to 15,000 or more on the Palestinian side, and which is always the numbers. We always have this sort of tit for tat, but it's never tit for tat, because
Right.
The numbers are always lopsided
Mm-hmm.
in relationship to who loses more life in this conflict currently around this thing, and so trying to find a way. People get so easily polarized, right? That you have to either be for Israelis or you have to be for Palestinians, and if you try to say you're for human beings, and you don't want any families to be grieving the loss of lives that they did on October 7th, and the total terror they have of their people who are kidnapped. We're grateful right now that some are being released and reunited with their families. That's great news. It needed to happen. It's good that it's happening. And Palestinians are in Gaza, having a break from the ongoing assault, and just the millions of people that were living under bombs and lack of water, lack of food, and there's a little break in that. That's a good thing. We give thanks for that. But the question then, what happens next,
Right.
is a big one for everyone,
Yeah.
right? So
I have a couple of the questions as we're coming toward a close on this, is because you've mentioned this thing with Israel, and when some started criticizing Israel, they sit there and they go, all right, well, you know what, that's anti-Semitism. So they're equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And what do you think around that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes it is, right? So, I mean, it takes a lot of care. Anti-Semitism is alive and horribly well in many parts of our nation and around the world. That's completely evident, and we have to, as Christian people, stand up and say no. That persons, because they are Jewish, are valued people. They have a sacred worth. Because they have, even if they have views that are, staunchly in support of Israel, they are still people that are allowed to express who they are and what they are. And there's a great diversity among Jewish people around the actions of the state government of Israel. There are things I think I think we have to be just intentional about saying, recognizing where there is anti-Semitism, which is attacks on Jewish people for who they are, for what they believe. That has absolutely nothing to do with anything that is a part of the conflict, right? And the same thing with Islamophobia. We have people going after Arabs of any descent because they think that they are attacking Jews, or they're attacking the Christianity, or they're whoever they think they're attacking, right? That they're all terrorists, that we lump them all in. So we have to be able to distinguish that, and we have to stand up strongly against those things. But when the attempt to equate any criticism of a government, in this case Israeli government, to anti-Semitism, and just blanket that, means that basically what you're doing is silencing all criticism, and that happens even to Jewish folks who criticize their government outside the country. So that's a concern. I have a huge concern, because there have been attempts in Congress to pass laws saying that any criticism of the state of Israel's government is anti-Semitism, and I blatantly say that is not true, and we need to be much more sophisticated in delineating that criticism. So.
Yes. All right. So I have one last question, and it leads to this, what we've discussed, and thank you. All right, so other than praying, which is very important, are there other things that Christians can and should be doing?
Well, and I would say again, I'm going to focus this thing, and most of our folks listening are probably from the United States. So, one, if you are part of any sort of mainline Protestant group, and even Catholics in this country, all of those churches have got good materials on education about the conflict. They have long-standing policies and commitments to peace with justice in that area. So if you haven't yet access that, learn about it. And one is to look at your news sources. This is where listening to U.S.-based news only and mainstream kind of news is you're not gonna get more than sound bites on most of that material. People need to give commitment to reading a little bit more. To look for some sources outside, the newspapers and news sources that come from other parts of the world, so that you get some different viewpoints on it. Two is sit down. If you have interfaith groups, this is right now a really hard one for us to have interfaith conversations on. People are really very tender right now, and it makes it really difficult to stay in conversation. It's always been a hard conversation for interfaith work, but this period means even more. We have to lean into that, and we have to find ways to talk about this conflict, this struggle, that allow space to hold each other's fears, to hold each other's rage, to hold each other's pain and questions, and not walk away from the table. This is when we need to be committed to staying at table with people that we want to, so that we don't perpetuate the kind of trauma that both Palestinians and Israelis are living with after the last number of generations. And so that if we want to actually help support a solution that's actually going to move us to a day where there's a chance for peace with justice, And because we fund so much of it here in the US, it's incumbent upon us to have those dialogues, to have those relationships, and to seek better understanding so that we can then inform our politicians, our elected leaders about, yes, this is a great way to go. No, this, you're just perpetuating the same problems happen. But if we don't do that work, and if
Mhm.
we can't do that work together, we're going to have a hard time being effective witnesses to the kind of world that we want to see built by our tax dollars and by our leaders.
Yes. Well, Rev Sandy, I just want to thank you so much for your time for this short stories episode. It's always a pleasure to be able to connect with you, and I look forward to hopefully having another conversation with you down the line.
Thanks, Mark. I know this is a hard one to do in a short period, so I hope it's helpful. I've just raised some questions for people to think about in this area. So thanks for having me today.
Oh, absolutely. And so I just want to say to our listening audience, thank you for connecting with us, and continue to like and download and share. And we're trying to spread the good news of what is happening here on the Harmony Podcast Network. And our next episode in December will be on the second Wednesday in December, and we'll be having a chat with Jase Lucas. So looking forward to that. A much lighter conversation. but this one was very important, Rev Sandy.
Yeah. Okay.
So I want to say also thank you to Donna Miller, as well as Jase Lucas, who are our production coordinators for these telecasts, these episodes. And so, Rev Sandy, I will be talking with you soon, all right?
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Mark.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.